Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Welcome back to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast. I'm Marie and I'm filling for Lu today while she's down with a brutal sore throat. Get well soon, Lu. But I'm stoked because today's episode is about something I found to be such a struggle, as I'm sure many others do through adulthood. Today we're learning about how to make friends as a grown-up, and to guide us through this is Dr. Mary Kempnich, a psychologist, a social network and connections researcher, and a conscious connection coach for high achievers. She's also been on Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast, to discuss netiquette, which if you haven't seen it, we'll link it in the show notes so you can check it out. Hi, Mary. How are you going?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm happy to be back.
That's great to hear. By the way, I'm really curious to know, in your coaching experience, how often do you come across clients who struggle with making friends in their adulthood?
So more often than you'd think. Funnily enough, not having friends is the biggest social taboo. It's way worse than admitting you don't have money, which is another taboo for many people. So it's something that only when someone feels comfortable, they're even open to talking about. But feeling lonely or not having enough people around to share life with is a very common concern for most people, although we hardly ever say it publicly.
Mm-hmm. And is there something that takes a while for your clients to open up to you about?
It's something that won't be stated explicitly up front. So hardly anyone will say, I lack friends, just because just in front of yourself, that can be quite a hard thing to admit. It will be more so coming out on the sidelines in terms of, well, I wouldn't know who to talk to about that. Or, yeah, but I spend most evenings either by myself or just with my partner or nuclear family. And then over time, it just emerges that that's what people are yearning for. But sometimes we're really good to not even admitting that to ourselves. So it might be a surprise still to actually hear it explicitly and be like, oh yeah, I guess I am longing for more friends.
Yeah, completely. And I feel like this is probably something that is maintained through a lot of other aspects of life as well, just not realizing certain things or knowing them, but saying them out loud is a different thing, and surprising yourself with it when you admit something to yourself. But that's a great introduction to our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, we'd like to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Dr. Mary Kempnich? My first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I really am quite nerdy in terms of what I do professionally. I love to do privately as well. So I'm very into creating conscious connections. I like to hold the context for the year to actually make time for my friends. So I like to make sure they are scattered all over the world, that I have time to, if I can't meet up in person, meet up virtually and actually share everyday life. Because very often when we don't live close, and we do talk, it'll be highlights, it'll be like, oh, what was Christmas like? But not what happens on a random like Tuesday afternoon. So that's very important to me. I love being in nature, and I just love being surrounded by aesthetically beautiful things. So whether that's nature or art or architecture, I'm very happy if I'm just visually surrounded by beauty.
Architecture and nature are so beautiful. And recently, there's been a lot of nature and architecture intertwining with each other, which is amazing to see. And it's really incredible that you managed to keep up with so many friendships from all across the world. What is your best kept secret for that?
You've got to commit to the friendship. And I think this is the core of a lot of our interpersonal issues these days. So in romantic relationships, I think we know we are the Tinder generation of sorts, where we can just endlessly swipe for more. But the same is true for friendship. So if we take something for granted, it's very easy to slip away. But if we are grateful for it, and if we're playing an active part in maintaining and sort of growing the friendship, that's often all it takes. Intention really makes a difference. So having that kind of lead the friendship forward, I think makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really interesting that you brought up intention, because it feels like with almost anything that you do, when you have that intention and this motivation to do something, when you feel grateful for something in your life, you put more effort into it, and you also at the same time get more out of it. But you did mention before that you like being out in nature and just looking at architecture. What are some of your favorite spots to gawk at?
So it's funny. I love both the sea and I also love the woods. So I'm not a big mountain person, but that can change. I think just because I love getting up the mountain, but then you still have to go down the whole way again. And that just sort of doesn't appeal. If a helicopter was going to pick me up at the top, I could get into mountain. But I normally love looking at just the vastness of the ocean, and you just feel so small in like the best possible way. It just shows you how small you are, which I think is beautiful. And I'm very fortunate that I at least sometimes live close to a forest, literally a 3-minute walk away. So I love to just walk through it. And I feel like it makes my thoughts flow so much more easily, because there's inspiration just everywhere. And I love that.
Yeah, for sure. I got to agree with you on the mountain part. Like, I do love the idea and the aesthetic of the mountain, but sometimes it's like you reach the top and that's the climax, right? And then now you're like, oh, now I've got to get to the bottom, and that's kind of anticlimactic. It's like it feels like a chore, but I guess you kind of have to. I've probably got to change my mindset on that, because maybe I can turn it into like, or it's a nice leisurely walk down. I don't know. But what kind of animals do you spot in the forest? Do you have any favorites?
I do love squirrels, and I love the red squirrels, which there are increasingly fewer of. So I like to spot those. I'm also a big fan of tiny birds. I just find them quite comical. They always look like they're up to something. So I really enjoy tiny birds, I suppose, and red squirrels. Those are just they're not the most exotic animals to spot, but they spark a lot of joy daily.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, tiny birds are adorable, and I love those fluffy tiny birds too, because they just look, again, like really, they look like a cartoon almost. And all the different colors that they come in, birds are just such an interesting species of animal.
So clever. They're just so clever. I have a dream of befriending some sort of raven. I don't have a raven close by, but crows are like also incredibly smart. And I just love this idea. I feel like I have a very loose friendship with with the little red robin, but I'm not sure if that bird feels the same way. But I recognize it.
That's adorable. I did hear, like, I have a friend who goes to the park all the time and has befriended this group of magpies, and he'll sing to the magpies, and the magpies will sing back to him and dance along, and it's just the most animated thing ever I've ever heard. But it is adorable. I feel like when you establish that friendship with birds, it's the most beautiful thing ever.
A real life Snow White. I'd love to just go outside, go no 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 no, and then all the birds. Yeah. My dream.
Completely. You also did mention that you love architecture. So what are some styles or eras that you feel most inspired by?
So either really old or very modern. I'm not a big fan well, so like the 60s, I feel like was not a good era for architecture. But when I live in Oxford, I'm just very happy because all the colleges are just so profoundly beautiful. And there was just a few people who built most of it, which is quite funny to think about. But it's a very harmonious landscape. There's such intricate detail. It's planned so thoroughly, and it sort of grew over time. So I like in historic cities how they just sort of add on with what's already there, which is horrible for traffic, but wonderful for the eye. And then in Düsseldorf, we have some Gehry buildings by the river, which are quite fun too. They're very modern. They're very different to sort of the Oxford prestige and history. But I like both of those. And when you can combine them in a way that works, I'm always very charmed by that.
Yeah, that is a very charming. It does add that personality to it, which is great. And I think my opinion is that the 2000s is probably the worst era for architecture, actually. Like 1960s, yes, but 2000s, some of these, like the plastic core. Anyway, what is a feature? What is an architectural feature that you always come back to and always think about?
So I don't know if the word is correct. Gargoyles, is that a word?
Yes, gargoyles, like those creatures.
So comical. And there are so many different ones. And I just feel like they're often overlooked, especially if they're small. But they crack me up. So I enjoy those.
Yeah, for sure. And the era where all of like the gargoyle statues were popular, each of the gargoyle statues tend to be different too. And the intricate work on it is just incredible. And, every time you look at it, you examine it, you notice something different. It's like watching Hamilton 3-4 times. Every time you watch it, you notice something different. Yeah. So in your professional or personal life, do you have someone that you look up to?
Yeah. So last time I already spoke a little bit about this. I like to find inspiration in the people around me. I very much believe in mutual admiration. So I think every single one of my friends, there is something I admire in how they lead their lives. And I think we sometimes believe we have to go for role models that are very far away. I think Salma Hayek is amazing. I think Amal Clooney is great. But do I know them personally? No. So sometimes I think if we're looking closer to home, it's actually a nice sign of appreciation of why do we keep these people around, because we love so many things about them. And it's also a lot easier to become that more because it's so close and it doesn't feel like on a pedestal very far away.
Completely. I love that you have so many different role models and you look up to, you find admirable traits in so many of your friends. That's definitely something I resonate with as well. And my last question for you is there a course that you've taken in your life that has inspired you or still touches you to this day?
So many. I find it hard to actually say that there's one thing that made a difference over anything else. I recommend working with mentors long term. So there's a couple of people that I've been learning from for 4 or 5 years now with, pauses in between and sometimes closer one-on-one and sometimes a bit further away from. But I think as a whole, I'm most deeply touched by work that I do for a long time with a person and where I actually dare to repeat. Because I think we often believe the more knowledge we just sort of absorb, the quicker we improve. And the more I learn, the more I understand that just repeating the same principles and actually implementing them and embodying them, that's what really yields the change. Because otherwise you're just racing from new hit of information to another, but you're not becoming that. You're just letting it sort of rush through your head. So working long-term with mentors and really not being afraid to be boring if you keep repeating what you're learning to make sure that actually becomes who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like drilling in this practice. It's perfecting something like, for example, when you're learning piano, you've got to keep practicing a certain song to really perfect it, rather than learning a whole 30 different songs every week and playing each one decently. If that's, yeah, that's probably what you were saying. But thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. And now we're moving on to the interview section. My first question for you is, what does happiness mean to you?
Yeah, I think happiness to me means not needing anything to change, but evolving from the pure desire of it. So it might be a little bit ironic and counterintuitive, but it means there's no pressure to be different, but you're sort of choosing to try something new or to expand further.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take on it. And what are some misconceptions that you've come across about happiness?
So I think what most people want it to be is some sort of thing they can tick off, and then it's just a stable situation, right? So like happiness, got it. And I think that's what trips people up, because the pursuit of happiness, I know it's in the Declaration of Independence, so it's something that we are in the Western world very actively, I think, striving for. It's nothing to hold. It's just it's a fleeting state. And so for me, it's more in the embodiment of how I feel in the moment, rather than something that I can show off to friends. Like if I buy a fancy car and I'm like, that's my happiness. That's not true. That might give you a big boost of dopamine. And I think that's another common misconception, that we think the rush we get from sort of dopamine hits, that equates to happiness. When for me, it's more the sort of oxytocin that we get from social bonding, and more the serotonin, and more the sort of deep-seated smiles that don't require a lot of movement, and we don't have to hold on to it. It's gonna go away again, yes, and that is fine. You're not failing if the happy moment fades.
Yeah, I love that that distinction that you made there between having a dopamine hit and happiness. From now, I'm going to describe anytime like I get a snack or something like that as I am experiencing a hit of dopamine rather than I am happy. And it does sound like in that sense, happiness is more of like you're at peace with yourself. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think maybe the general state is contentment, and then you can actually see the happy moments, because they're there all the time. We have them all the time. It's just nothing that we can grasp. It's just more something that we get to become aware of. Similarly to the little birds in the forest, right? They are there. We're not trying to catch them, though. We're just looking at them and thinking, oh, look at you, Robin. And that's it. That's all it is.
That's a really good way of putting it. And what kind of effect do you think establishing and maintaining friendships as an adult has on our happiness?
So I find this very wild, but the biggest. So what we really overlook, people are always looking for ways to improve their life, is friendships. There any life outcome you want to throw at me. So happiness being one of them, life satisfaction, mental health, physical health, also mortality. Having a supportive, stable relationship cuts your risk of dying in half, which is insane. There's no medication that can do this. There's no exercise regimen that can do that. So it is our most powerful asset to lead a long, happy, healthy life. And we often treat it like our least priority in the day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. That is unfortunate that we do live in a society now where we treat it like the lowest thing on the list. But hopefully we do get to a place where we start prioritizing it more. But I was also curious, on the contrary, on the flip side, what kind of effect does being happy have on establishing and maintaining friendships?
Yeah, that's a great question, because sometimes when we look at correlational research, it's not clear which causes the other, right? And it's a bi-directional effect. So if you are, happier, again, I want to be a bit fearful of, because that can make people feel like they have to put on a front and pretend they're happy, this whole toxic positivity thing. So I want to stay clear of that. But if we are content with ourselves, if we generally have a positive outlook, if we feel optimistic in like the world is for us and not against us, that will just make us so much more open to forming bonds with people, to actually put in effort into the friendships we already have, and to invest our time and energy into social connection, because we walk through life anticipating that this will work and this will be nice and people are great. So that makes a big, big, big difference. Does not have to mean that you can't be in a foul mood when you hang out with a friend. I think recently on social media, there has been so much emphasis on spotting red flags, whether in dating or in friendships, and looking out for toxic relationships and cutting ties. And I think that is actually counterproductive because it increases loneliness, and we are not here to perform for our friends and to. I had students when I give talks in schools. I had students as young as 10 tell me things about, oh, I had to cut ties with my best friend because he wasn't bringing out my best like self in class, and that to me is just missing the point. So we don't want to fake happiness, but if we are internally content, that facilitates all the relationships we have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And with regards to being an adult, how does the process of making friends as a grown-up differ from making friends during adolescence or during our childhood?
It's a great question. So when we are tiny, we actually are the best socially because we are coming from that place where we think unless something is not going very well for us, but we tend to think the world is this exciting place to explore and other people are just inherently exciting and we want to get close to them. So you'll have small toddlers or even babies make contact with other people in public spaces, right? If you've ever been at an airport, there's a baby around, it will try to get your attention, you will try to get the baby's attention. And there's a lot of communication that doesn't even depend on sharing a language. Maybe this baby can't speak, maybe you're not speaking the same language. Does not matter. We're very uninhibited in terms of connecting with one another. Still in kindergarten, preschool, whatever you want to call it, people will walk up to each other and say, hey, I'm so-and-so. Do you want to be my friend? And then the other person will just go, yes or no. And then they'll hold hands and they're friends. Maybe just for an hour, but it's very, very effortless. And it just sort of is explicitly stated, I have a desire for friends. Do you want to be that? The older we get, the more socially awkward we make this for some reason. So if you and I met in a public place now, and I started to go wave at you and sort of smile and try to get your attention, you would probably find that rather odd because you would be like, what's the point? What does this person want from me? So we're less explicit, which often also means two people can repeatedly bump into each other. Both would be really keen to form some sort of bond, but no one will dare to make the move because we are much more aware of difficulties and we're much more afraid of rejection.
Yeah. And from a psychological standpoint, why do you think that is? What factors contribute to this?
So if we go back in time from an evolutionary standpoint, we are meant to just live in one community. So hunter-gatherer tribes still display that. We normally have family units, and then we have a few family units living together. And typical community size is around 150 individuals. So if from an evolutionary standpoint, you're sort of born into a group like this, and then you might migrate with some of those people, but you're not ever as an adult expected to immerse yourself in a new social environment. So we are hardwired to sort of stick to what we've got in a sense and be suspicious of any stranger. This is also where a lot of stereotyping and racism and things come from, right? So we have our tribe, and I'm saying that in quotation marks because I don't want to be culturally inappropriate, but in hunter-gatherer tribes, that is the term that we would use from an anthropological point of view. We have our group, and there seems to be little need to expand that. And if there is someone else rocking up on the scene, it's well advised to be suspicious because they might want to take resources, or we don't know what they have in mind, or they might actually have been shunned from their group, and that might indicate that there's something wrong with them, right? So it's not hardwired for us to do it. And also, it is a very dangerous thing to admit that you are in need of social context for the same reason. If you were kicked out of a group, normally that would mean there's something really difficult about you in a social context. So this might be you carried some sort of disease that could kill the whole family, so therefore you had to be kicked out. Or it might be that you're very antisocial and you're actually not conducive to the group environment. Obviously, none of that applies in most parts of the world anymore, but it's very deeply seated within us. And so if you see someone who wants something from you as an adult that you don't know, that seems to be a stranger, and they're kind of on their own, our initial subconscious, none of us, I think, are doing this consciously, take is just to think, oh, who is that? What does this person want? And asking someone for a friendship almost seems ridiculous. If you bump into someone in the supermarket and you say, oh, hi, I noticed we're picking up the same kind of melon. Would you like to hang out today? People would just be very confused, I think, for the most part, just because it's not what we're used to.
Yeah, I would have to agree that I would be confused. It would be an interesting encounter though. And do you think this is something that we need to overcome, this fear of creating connection and forming friendships just randomly?
I think that's the number one concern I have for the world right now, because we can talk about it in like a fun way in terms of, people are more lonely and it would be fun to meet more people, sure. But I also think globally, we are splitting more and more into small subgroups, and we find it increasingly difficult to connect with anyone who isn't exactly like us. And that becomes problematic because we have a tendency to self-segregate according to similarities anyway. So most people will have more friends of their own gender, for instance. And even in communities with non-binary individuals, they will have far more other non-binary friends than would be found in the population, right? So birds of a feather flock together. That is true. We have very strong ethnic segregation within and across communities, and we are becoming increasingly segregated in terms of our ideologies and values, even within families. And it gives us this illusion that if you're not like me, you're against me, and there's nothing to talk about. So both from an individual standpoint of, wouldn't it be nice to hang out with more fun people, but also in terms of a global peace and harmony mission, I think relearning how to connect in your actual life, not virtually scrolling and writing comments under other people's pictures, which can also help, that can be a tool, but actually walking down the street and just connecting with the people really, I think, has the potential to make all of us happier and to actually create a better world.
Yeah. And with the prevalence of social media, do you think technology has played a part in this segregation?
Yeah. So on the one hand, I always want to make sure it's balanced. So on the one hand, I think it's a beautiful opportunity. If it wasn't for social media, it would be a lot more difficult for me to maintain my friendships that are from different countries and in different cultures. And it can be a great way to actually find like-minded people if you have a niche interest, for instance, and no one is around that shares that. You can find a whole group of people that share that with you, right? So it's an excellent way to make friends in a certain setting. But it also, the algorithms are only partially to blame because they're catering to our behaviors. So we tend to go for what we like, and that means that over time we get shown more of what is similar to us, and that also becomes more extreme over time, and it skews our perception of what the world is. So let's say a very hopefully easy issue is, do we prefer dogs or cats, right? So this is hopefully very apolitical. So if we normally think there's a spectrum of people, and there's people that love cats and absolutely loathe dogs and the opposite, that's fine. If we keep looking at cat videos because we're really into cats, and we keep being shown cat videos and people that are crazy about cats, that might over time make us forget that the dog lovers exist, and we think the world is only about cats. And within that there's a spectrum, obviously. There's the fanatics that have everything in their house full of cats, and there's the ones that just like to look at them from time to time. But we then think this is the world, this is the spectrum, and we are not aware of this part. And that just keeps us very distant from one another, because if then you happen to encounter a dog lover in the supermarket, for instance, you would be absolutely gobsmacked and potentially freaked out. How could anyone like a dog? I've never seen this before. I don't know anyone like this, right? So we just get really spooked by our differences just because we forget that the world's full of diverse people, and it's not just the tiny section that we see.
That is true. I can vouch for that. I am a huge cat lover, and I always see cat videos online. And whenever I see people walking their dogs on the street, I'm like, what is going on? And like, surprisingly, I only really ever, because I only get cat videos, I rarely see dog videos online. I only see dogs in real life. So the only thing that's like keeping my perception in check is going outside. So what advice do you have for overcoming that fear of initiating a friendship?
I would just take it down a notch for yourself and not have the expectation that this will be a lifelong friendship and you can mess it up or you can succeed, because that puts so much pressure on this whole endeavor. I would start by just interacting with the people that are actually surrounding you. So this could just be on the street, actually looking at the other people. You know, small talk is a highly underrated skill. People think, oh, I like to go deep. I don't want to waste time with small talk. I don't have any interest in talking about the weather, right? When actually talking about the weather is a very low effort and low risk of rejection way to connect with someone, or talking about a public transportation that you're waiting for together, right? So anything that you're sharing in the moment with a total stranger can be a nice moment to connect that doesn't have to lead anywhere. And ironically, the less you need it to lead anywhere, the more likely it is to go somewhere, right? Because if you're lounging around an airport and you're like, who's my next best friend? That might just come off as pretty creepy, right? Or if you're going to a movie theater by yourself and you're just sort of eyeing the other people, you're like, oh, they laughed when I laughed. That's my new bestie. That probably won't bode well, just because other people, as I said earlier, we're very susceptible to small cues that other people are desperate for connection, which is sadly why once you are the victim of bullying, often it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, because people that have been bullied in the past will enter social relationships sort of fearful of being rejected. And we can feel that, we can sense that, right? So instead of going in lurking around for your next best friend, it's a lot better to just think, I'm just out here to have a good time. And the more I can connect with random strangers on the way, obviously be cautious, right? Don't connect with people that seem scary. But just the more you can share a little moment of connection, the less of a deal it's going to be for you to talk to people. And that means that over the long run, the easier it's going to be to actually maybe put your feelers out and see if someone wants to spend more time together. But it doesn't become this mission that you can fail at.
That's a really good way of looking at things. And interestingly enough, that was actually my approach to dating as well. When I was dating, I approached it from like, okay, I want a long-term partner, but I can't go into every date hoping that it turns out that way. That's just going to end terribly. And that's something that I've seen a lot of my friends do as well. So that's actually the approach that I recommend to a lot of people. And to your previous points, you mentioned that small talk is underrated, which I completely agree with. And small talk can be actually really fun if you choose to see it that way, or if you choose to make it fun. What are some prompts you have?
So what works very well is making it very relevant to the other person. So there are safe topics such as shared environments. So anything you see, if it is the weather, if you're looking at a nature scene together, if you are in a crowded airport together, those things lend themselves well just because they're not intrusive and you share that automatically. But then the more you can make it personalized to the individual you're talking to, the better. Look for every powerful person is an excellent small talker. I think we forget this. If you look at really powerful, charismatic politicians, really powerful, charismatic royals are great at this. If you're looking at celebrities that are very charismatic and carry themselves with an air of friendly confidence, they're all excellent at small talk, and they never make it about themselves. So if you tell someone about yourself, what's in it for them, their role is then to admire you and to sort of say, oh, you're great, right? But if you make it about them, and it can be personalized compliments, for instance, I would stay away from anything that is appearance-based, just because that could be misunderstood as some sort of romantic advance, or maybe you think something is beautiful in someone and they have a really hard time with it and you don't know, right? So there's a potential to get that wrong. But if it's something about their behavior, if it's something about the tone of voice, if it's something about how they handle a particular situation, normally people like to feel seen and appreciated, and effort. They like to see that other people see that they put effort into something and actually appreciate it. So the more you can tailor and the more you can make it about the person and not about you, the better.
That's really interesting that you brought up charismatic celebrities and public figures. I did reflect on it a little bit while you were mentioning that, and I just recall watching interviews with celebrities where some of the celebrities would actually engage in a conversation with the interviewer and ask about the interviewer a bit more too. And that was always such a pleasant surprise. A lot of people, a lot of the internet users would go crazy for that, because it's like, wow, an approachable celebrity, someone who cares about someone else. And that's always been admirable. So that's really interesting, the parallels that you get with reflecting on this. But as an adult, like we mentioned before, one of the biggest obstacles is prioritizing friendships and trying to line up busy schedules. What advice do you have for maintaining friendships?
Yeah, so I almost think that's an even bigger issue than meeting new people, because again, we often are in a society where we just want more, and we're not using what we have. What I said earlier, but when you learn something repeated, it's the same. The friendships you have, nurture them. We know that the hours spent with a friend are absolutely crucial to maintain the friendship. And the fewer hours we spend together, the easier it is for them to sort of slip off our radar. And yet, as you said, most of us have professional schedules that keep us busy. If we have a partner or children, or both, ideally, that really keeps us busy as well. And so often friendships are on the back burner and we take them for granted until they're no longer someone we can call. So one thing that I think really helps is internally admitting to yourself that you care about this person a lot and you actually want to prioritize that. And then actually just observing the choices you make just for a week, just see how you live and whether that actually aligns with prioritizing friendships or not. You might also say, you know what, I'm not prioritizing friendships at the moment because maybe I have 2 small toddlers and I have a big project at work. That's okay too. I think knowing that is also fine. And you might even give friends a heads up and say, for the next 3 months, pretend I'm not there, but I will resurface. That is totally fine. We don't have to make it center stage if it's not naturally set up that way. But if you notice after you've observed your life for a week that you're not actually making any effort or you're not making any time, then that might help you to see that you're also actually very powerful at changing that, right? Because very often we think, oh, I wish I could, I wish this would happen. But if you see, okay, but I actually have done absolutely nothing to make time for my friends, do not beat yourself up about it. That's what we tend to do. But instead see this as an opportunity. That means, well, if only I tried a little, like, who knows how beautiful this could be, right? So something I've done that I'm very proud of with my best friend who lives in California is actually proposed a weekly standing time for us to talk. And at first, I did think that was quite a big commitment because both of us can only do that on the weekend. And that means every Sunday at a certain hour, I'm not available for anyone else. And I will really protect that time slot. but it means that I am very connected to the entire kind of everyday life experience of the other person. And it means that we're not just sharing highlights, because that actually often makes us feel less connected. If we're just saying, oh, that was great and this is going wonderfully and how are you? Then it is harder for us to say, I actually am having a bit of a hard time with this. And we become this sort of, it can happen that people become a little bit competitive and just showing off to each other, which is the opposite of like an authentic connection. Whereas if you have a regularly standing time slot to talk, you will sometimes have deep philosophical conversations about, life in the world. Sometimes it'll be super mundane and something will have spilled in the kitchen and you're on the phone while the other person like mops it up, right? But that actually creates intimacy and shared experience and lets you get closer in a very non-sexual way. Obviously, I'm using that word. If that it doesn't seem feasible, if you have more than one friend, which hopefully you do, you can't do that for everyone because otherwise your week would be full. I am a big fan of being in touch with small messages that have very little pressure on them. So sometimes we feel like we have to be on the phone for a long time or write long pieces, just updating one another or meeting up for several hours at once. If you live far away, that might be the only way. I like living close to people. So I've been very lucky that I've always either lived in tiny places or I happen to live walking distance to at least a couple of people. So even if you just come down, if you meet up in the park for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, don't underestimate the power of that. If you're sending someone just a funny picture you found online, right? If you see one of your cat videos and you're like laughing, then you have a friend who likes that. Don't feel like you're not putting in enough effort by just sending that to them and ideally saying something so it's a little bit personalized so people don't think you just sent that to everyone you know, right? That makes a difference. And then I'm a big fan of voice notes. I know some people absolutely hate them and I think that is totally fine, but a lot of people love them. And especially when I have friends in different time zones or countries, I find it such an effortless way to communicate because you can actually carry on whole conversations across weeks and people can pick it up when they have time, which is really, really nice because then you're both using your time efficiently and you're sort of staying connected through life at your own pace, which I think is the key to making it work. It can completely disrupt your life, but you do want to make an active effort to maintain those friendships because it's a really precious thing to just see someone grow alongside you for decades. That is a very underrated thing to enjoy in life.
That is such great advice because voice notes kind of afford you that phone conversation quality without having to commit to like an hour long on the phone if you don't have the time to commit an hour straight, especially if you live in different time zones too. So that's really helpful and that's really smart. And I never thought of it that way. I don't think I barely use voice messages with my friends, I think like once in a while, but that's definitely something I'll think about a bit more. And sending videos that you see online to your friends also reminds them that you're thinking about them and this video reminded you about them. So that's really smart. I don't want to say low effort because it sounds awful, but it's less pressure, low pressure way to remind your friends that you're thinking about them. So that's really great advice. Did you have any? Yes.
So something about the low effort. It's okay if it's low effort in terms of time and energy, but you can make it feel like $1 million by personalizing. So the same thing that I said about small talk applies to this. If I have the feeling you're sending this to everyone you know and there's no comment underneath it, then I might still be chuffed. That's possible. But if you are sending something to me that is very specific to our friendship and you're writing, even if it's just 2 words underneath it, that just makes me think, like you and I, like we get each other. That is a whole different thing. And that is quite beautiful because you are tailoring it to the individual, but it doesn't take a lot of space in your day to do it.
Right. It makes all the difference. Before we end off, did you have any last pieces of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners regarding friendships as an adult?
Yes. So a lot of what I've just shared about maintaining might resonate more with people that identify as female, just because that tends to be easier in terms of communicating across time and space and being on the phone. And a lot of people that identify as male might not be so keen to spend time on the phone with their friends anyway. That's not true for everyone, obviously, but the data does suggest that there are some gender differences. So for anyone who identifies as a man and who wants to also maintain friendships, it's really good to do things in groups for either gender, but specifically for men, if you have an activity that sort of you can do that is not about talking. Because one of the things that actually, I left this person out with a role model, but Robin Dunbar is the person I've done my PhD with, who I hold in incredibly high esteem, who is one of the wisest people I've ever met and the funniest too, which is a hard combination, I think, to get to. He always says women meet to talk and men talk because they happen to be meeting. And I think while we can't generalize, obviously individuals are very different, there's something to it that sometimes with male friendships, just communicating with one another, just sharing their life feels a little bit odd sometimes. So if there's an activity that bonds you, that is often easier. Now that can, in person, that is pretty straightforward. You can do some sort of sports together. You can watch sports together. You can have, you could also have a knitting group if that's something you're into. So I'm not just wanting to go for stereotypical options here, but even if you are not in the same place, you can do things. I think Netflix used to have a party, like a viewing party, something where everyone can watch it together, although you're somewhere else, which was great during the pandemic. Like I've done that with friends too, and I thought that was pretty fun. You can do, I think in the US, fantasy football leagues are like a big thing where you're just picking people, right? So you can pick whatever it is that you want to do, even if it's just a group of friends that just send each other funny pictures and they're like themed around something. It doesn't really matter, but often it's like having some sort of purpose for the meeting helps people to do it. And another really fun way to maintain friendship is actually to run errands with one another. I cannot tell you how deeply satisfying it is to run errands with another person who you can talk to and have fun with. And it's super underrated. So for your next grocery run, if you just ask a friend to come along, or if you're going, I don't know, if you're getting your hair cut, I think that's one of the more obvious like spa-like experiences. But it can also be like changing gas or having an oil change for your car or whatever. It doesn't have to be a glamorous activity, but doing those sort of things together are incredibly bonding, and they just signal to your entire system that this is almost part of the family, because we're doing things together that are maybe not intrinsically exciting, but I'm choosing to do them with you because I want to share life with you. So that don't underestimate them, and don't think you are offending a good friend if you want to hang out with them during those times, because that's what matters most.
I completely agree with you there. I feel like the most mundane activities or mundane tasks, when you do it with a friend, it just makes it all the more intimate and all the more special, because otherwise you'd be doing them alone. And this is someone that you want to do something this mundane and something that you typically do alone with. And that just makes it so special. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now we're moving on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
I obviously am pretty passionate about this topic. And I think what I would just love to share with people is to dare to connect. So just very practically, eye contact, I feel like, is a dying art. And I don't mean like creepily staring, but actually just acknowledging another person's presence. So I would really urge you to just practice looking at people and just see how tricky that might be, because people will be like, well, how hard can it be, Mary? And then you walk down the street and you'll see how hard that can actually be, right? So just seeing if you can actually connect with people for like the briefest of moment, a split second, just sort of catching someone's eye. And ideally, like not coming across as a threatening entity. That would be great, just as a bit of a caveat. And also to have gratitude for all the people you have in your life. So what I hear most often from clients, also from my students at university, from friends, through family, old people, young people, across the board, is basically that most of us feel lonely. And I think, first of all, it's very helpful to acknowledge that, and that's also normal. So even if you're very well connected, you have all the friends in the world, huge family, professional network, we are all meant to feel lonely at parts in our life. Like, that is totally normal. If you never felt lonely, that would make me more concerned, to be quite honest with you. And knowing that we all feel lonely, I think opens up the gates to just be more mindful and grateful for the connections we actually do have. So I often do this with myself when I vision for the future and I think about what do I want to, achieve, accomplish, what I want my life to look at. Like, sometimes I think, but I don't have the people around to do this with, right? So the other day I thought about, I always want to have lunch with someone. I think it's really fun to always have lunch because it's in the middle of the day, and there's again lots of evidence that if you share meals with people, that's really like good for you, and obviously that's just a fun thing to do. And for a moment, I was like, I don't know if I know enough people to have lunch with every day of the week. And then I actually made a list of possible people I could have lunch with in the various places that I often live in. And I was like, oh my God, this is a huge list. I could see people all the time. And it was a very sort of positive experience that we miss the tree in the forest because we think, I know nobody. We know a lot of people. And even if we haven't been in touch for a while, as long as you make the hurdle small to get in touch again, and as long as you're not making the other person feel guilty, right? So sometimes what we have is there's an absence within the friendship for various reasons. Someone will have a baby, a move, like something happens, and we don't talk for a while. If the other person comes back, do not tell them, long time no see you. I didn't think I was going to see you again. That is not going to go well. That's not an attractive way to welcome back someone you love, right? So as long as we can deal with those feelings that we might have on our own and just be open to reconnecting with who's already there and with just really fostering those relationships in really small ways, it doesn't have to be huge and effortful ways, the quality of life just goes up like crazy. I am so happy that coming back full circle to your definition of happiness, right? Whenever I'm not having the best day, or if I'm not in a good mood, I connect with someone, even if it's just a voice note, so they're not even there. I'm just in my mind talking to them, right? I don't know when they're going to listen to it. I feel so much happier just because I've reaffirmed someone I care about exists. It doesn't even matter if they care about me in that moment, right? But I can care about someone. I can love someone. That's very exciting. And I can make the life of other people better just purely through my existence. So I don't think I have to share profound wisdom to have that effect on people. But I think even if I'm on a walk in the woods, I see a funny bird and I tell a friend, oh my God, guess what I've just seen? That's like sufficient to make someone's day better, right? And so realizing the power you have and the connections that are already there and just feeling really grateful for what is there instead of chasing unrealistic Instagram pictures where everyone is dressed in designer clothes and Saint-Tropez living it up. And those people actually, like, not everyone, but I know a lot of people, and often what looks the most glamorous online is actually the less consciously connected offline. Don't get blinded by that. Much better to hang out sometimes in your PJs with a friend and just do something very boring, but laugh together and have a good time.
That is so well said. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that with us and for joining us today. If our listeners want to find more about you and find your work online, where can they go?
Yeah, so the two places I like to direct people to are either LinkedIn, which I actually find really underrated. It's a great platform, and Instagram. So LinkedIn, obviously a little bit more professional, a bit more leaning towards the research side of things. And then Instagram, just my love for aesthetics. I just chuckle to myself about what I post. It's not even intended to do anything for my business most of the time. It's just to cheer me up and create more beauty and sort of share my thoughts as I go through life. So both of those places are somewhere I'm happy to connect. Let me know you're coming from the podcast so I know what you've listened to.
Excellent. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you learned something about making friends. We hope you incorporate some of these advice into your life, and hopefully it will be for the better. Thank you once again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.